Hello and welcome to Conversations with Ex-Catholics. I am thrilled and honored to be joined again today by Anthony from Dragons of Victory. That's the first time I've got to say that. What's up, Anthony?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much again, Kevin, for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
Always good to have you. I was going to ask you, so I introduced you. I said, Anthony from Dragons of Victory. You've been on the show before, but I've never said that before. What's the Dragons of Victory?
Mhm. Right. So, the Dragons of Victory is the channel that started, but I'm really sorry, but I can hear our voices in the phones, and it's kind of screwing me up a bit. I'm trying to talk, and it's hard to talk with it while I'm hearing my voice at the same time. So, sorry,
Do
guys,
you have this?
but
Do you have
I
this stream up?
like this. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I can see it. I can see it fine.
You could, like, as
Oh,
in, do you have the stream on
what?
YouTube up? Because you can mute the stream on YouTube.
Oh, I do. Yes, I do. There we go. All right.
There you go.
I did have the stream up. Okay, my bad, guys. Sorry. Great way to start this, huh? All right. Anyway, anywho, yes, I had it pulled up on the other tab. That's why I was hearing it. So starting over, my name is Anthony Spurgeon. I've had the honor of being on Kevin's show a couple times already. And this time I'm on to, and we can talk more about this at the end too, but this time I'm on to sort of like let you guys know about the YouTube channel I've started. It's called The Dragons of Victory. I chose that name for reasons that I go into in the video, and I've even I think I first pitched it or talked about the idea at the tail end of my last conversation with Kevin. I think you can actually find that where at the very end I talk about the idea for this channel here because this whole endeavor of talking about my experience and sharing this message of this group, it's been a difficult one in many ways, and it's been a lot less difficult than a lot of people have it. But at the same time, um, just because of the amount of just how draining this kind of thing can be, the constant revisiting of these memories from my past and the constant analysis and consideration of ideas that are awful and concepts that are off just definitely takes a toll. And I just don't want any work I do. I just don't want to be drowned in the awfulness of all of that. And so that's why the Dragons of Victory, for me, I didn't put the channel under my own name. I have many other projects that I want to focus more of my energy on. Well, but at the same time, this is still very important to me, and I haven't done everything I feel like I need to do yet. And so the channel is a for me to talk and to share my own thoughts and analysis, but also to promote other channels. I talked about Kevin's channel in my first interview, and just to have a banner or a, a phrase or something that can be identifiable instantly as being a part of this whole mission, right? To raise awareness, and I want it to be not just about me. So that's why I started the channel. And don't expect super regular updates or super regular channel content. Uh, I'm not. I'm not managing this channel. It'll get big as it gets, but I'm not. Um, Analyzing it to try and boost the most views. I'm just trying to get the information out there in some way, in some small way. So, yeah, that's my long ass explanation of what's going on here. And thank you so much to that girl, Ray. That's very nice.
Yeah, I figured I'd just pull that one up. Also, Anton says he says nice suit. So we've got fans of your
Oh,
suit.
thank you, Anton. Yeah, I got a suit on. I've got a nicer background. I've got better camera equipment. Last couple times, I was just sitting on my couch with my Chromebook on my lap, so I figured I'd have a bit more of a presentation this time.
I like it, and apparently the audience does too.
Yeah.
So today we had the joint goals of, I guess, number one, introducing Dragons of Victory, and then number two, talking
Yeah.
a little bit. Oh, actually, did you want to kind of introduce the topic for today, or do you want me to?
Yeah, sure. So no, I can do it.
Cool.
So because I the topic for the last one was exorcisms and the whole culture of celebrity exorcists and priests who claim to celebrity priests like Ripperger and Lampert who, you know, talk about all the demons whose asses they've kicked, and they tell all these crazy stories, and that's something we could definitely revisit soon. But today I wanted to go more into the issues regarding language and definitions, because in trad culture, what they a theme that you hear a lot about is clarity. They talk about all they deride the Second Vatican Council mainly for reasons of what they say they're ambiguous. They're not the language of the Second Vatican Council requires too much interpretation. It's not clear. So according to them, they make things really clear and precise and easy to understand, but they really don't, because there are so many all cults, high religious groups have a pattern of creating their own language, their own they redefine words, they make it so where outside criticism is a lot more difficult, because if you're looking in and you're seeing everyone talking in this specific language and they're using words and phrases you don't understand, you're just not going to know what you're looking at. And a very difficult thing about leaving groups like this is trying to teach the outside world this whole other language of what things mean when you're discussing certain things, and also taking words that have a very specific definition in the outside world and having a different definition inside the group. So that's the issue. That's the stuff we wanted to go over today. I can't I can't hear you again.
Sorry, I thought I hit the unmute button, but I did not. Thank you for that introduction. With that, we have a couple different topics that we've kind of already prepared, and I have a feeling that we'll go off on tangents because that's what happens. But that girl Ray was saying that she really hopes to hear about the redefinition of words such as love and good, and you touch on those in the first topic that we put on our list. The first topic that we put on our list was freedom. We think that trads redefine the word freedom, and that has to do a little bit with at least good, right? So
Mhm.
Anthony, how do you, what, you're the one who added freedom to our list.
Yeah.
What did you have in mind?
Well, so the word freedom, we all understand to me, like, essentially it means doing what you want in the most basic sense. I mean, and of course, that when in the tradcath world, when they define the freedom, they add this moral layer to it where, you know it, in the outside normal world, when we say freedom, we say free to do whatever I want, but usually the key understanding there is, well, you're not free to kill people, you're not free to hurt people, you'll be put in jail for that. And so I think that the way the outside world operates, obviously people are gonna screw each other over and everything, but what I mean to say is, um the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would do. That's sort of the basic framework of our definition of freedom, which means do whatever you want, just don't hurt other people. And that's what the libertarian uh, movement and party is all about. The maximizing individual freedom. And that's the definition we work with, in the normal world. But in they take that, and they take the principle of you're not free to hurt people, and they change it in trad Catholicism, where they say your freedom is like freedom to do whatever God says, right? And so that they'll literally put it that explicitly, right? They'll say, they'll talk about religious liberty, religious freedom, and criticize it, and they'll say, well, that's not what the church teaches, and it's like, okay, but you're kind of missing the point. The point of religious freedom is to allow everyone to coexist in a society, and have your uh, have the belief structure that gives you fulfillment and make you happy, but allow that same right to someone else. And when you have this, their version of freedom, their version of freedom automatically leads to slavery, right? Because everyone else is who disagrees with their definition of freedom becomes slaves. And again, it's a definition of freedom that is insular to within their world. And so yeah, that's a perfect first example, I think, freedom, because you hear that one all the time. You'll always hear trad Catholics whenever they're going on about about how bad religious liberty is. They'll pull out their screwy definitions of freedom and such.
Yeah, the 1984. So the backdrop of the thumbnail is from 1984, and part of the quote from I haven't read 1984 in like, oh, geez, I was gonna say in 10 years. It's been longer than 10 years, but remember that quote: "War is
Yeah.
peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength."
Hmm. Yeah.
Freedom is slavery. So I think that trad Catholics
Yeah.
might actually agree with that to some degree, and here's what I mean by that. Um,
Yeah.
Trad Catholics will define freedom, and this is how I've heard it. So, like freedom, so called, what it really is the ability to pursue the good. That's it. That's all it is.
Hmm.
So, people will often
Yeah.
say that you don't have free will in heaven, right? Like I might say to a Catholic,
Yeah.
we don't have free will in heaven, right? And they'll be like, no, of course we do, because all free will is the ability for you to pursue the good. And in heaven, you're going to be able to clearly see what the good is, so you're going to pursue that and nothing else.
Hmm.
And that's just simply not,
Right.
as far as I see it, that's not what most people mean when they say freedom. What I think of as freedom is the
No.
ability to have done otherwise. That's how I think about freedom. So, and I said that on purpose, right? Because
Yeah. Choice.
yeah,
Yeah.
and not perfect choice, because I'm not free because I can't fly right now, right? Like I can't fly.
Hmm.
But I don't think that limits
Right.
my freedom. But what I do have right
Hmm.
now is the ability to do otherwise. So if you lack the ability to do otherwise, I think that you are not free. That's what I mean by freedom. Freedom is having the ability to do otherwise.
Yeah.
And I don't think trads mean that when they use the
Yeah.
word freedom. And I think that's the problem. You know?
Well, mentioned you mentioned you mentioned the freedom of slavery line, and there's one traditional order of priests which I think were founded by Feeney. Aren't they literally called the slaves of the Immaculate Heart or something like
Yeah.
that?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, so within the trad world, they're proud of the label slave, because we're the right kind of slave. That's the thing. It's and this is all. We're already getting into a larger theme here, which I wanted to cover as well. That has to do with the contradictory terms and all this, and it's a broader issue of contradictory themes. So it's 1984 is brought up all the time by you know uh, the right wingers to this is about communism, right? This is about the Soviet Union. This is about Stalin, and so is Animal Farm, and they're right. That's what Orwell was writing about. But I often think that if these uh, I think that if they really took a closer look at Orwell, they wouldn't be quite as eager to make him their hero, because Orwell was talking about fascism, and communist government becomes a form of fascist government. It's what they claim they're against, but it's the two extremes, right? It's the there life should be about balance. I think that we all agree that a healthy life is a balanced life, but these political ideologies so often um are about, because they're about power and because they often become binary, that skews balance, that screws balance up. So the kind of government that they talk about, the Tradcaths talk about when they talk about the social reign of Christ the King, right? That's their vision for society. It is no separation of church and state, right? The Catholic Church, going back to the way things were, right, in the 1500s and 1600s. If you actually study history, and you study the history of the Catholic Church without the filter that you were given growing up in that, right? You realize that they operated pretty much exactly like Soviet Russia, modern day North Korea. The suppression of information, the harsh, the execution of dissent. The the authoritarian structure of it, right? Uh, we were taught so much about communism growing up in trad Catholicism. We read 1984. We read Animal Farm. We just talked a lot about how evil Stalin, how evil the Soviet Union was, and communist government, and fair enough. But the idea is that this is this is when atheism takes control, right? This is when secularism takes control. It was all the boogeyman, uh, but yet you just look at the king, and it's the exact same circumstance. And that's here I want to bring up is the the culture of presenting these contradictory ideas and contradictory themes, and you presented something and it's like, wait, that doesn't jive with that other thing you said before, and then they have to get into like, oh, you just don't. And they always also turn your not understanding it into some sort of accusation of when it gets down to the wire, right? When it gets down to the nitty gritty, when you're really having issues with the definitions, the attempting to explain it to you part stops, and the moral outrage and the moral the anger directed towards you for even following these questions through starts to get you in trouble, and so you just back off. Which again is exactly how these authoritarian communist structures operate. So anyway, Hitchens frequently made the point that the USSR were religious in practice. Yeah, exactly. And it's so funny how there's just this complete blindness to the clear parallels of, I would say it's, again, it's life's about balance, and these are the two extremes. The extremes that happen when you start to not think, not see. Again, the golden rule, it might just really be all we need as a society. It's so simple as not what, not, I was quoting JFK there. No, it's I was about to say the ask not what your country could do for you, but it's the golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And when you get into this authoritarian structure, the people in power are like, realize that what's bad for these people is good for me, but I'm gonna do it anyway. I don't care. I'm going to use them as tools for my enrichment and my happiness. And that's what authoritarian cults on the on the communist side do, and that's what far right religious cults do. It's the same behavior.
Couple quick thoughts. So I don't disagree necessarily with Hitchens' quote. It's just I might change it to something like this. Instead of saying the USSR, North Korea, and Maoist China were religious in practice, I might say something like the USSR, North Korea, Maoist China, and certain religious visions of government are all totalitarian. That's what I would say. And I do think that the trad Catholic, like the stereotypical trad Catholic preferred government anyway, is totalitarian. I mean, they literally talk about monarchy. Like they want to bring monarchy back.
Yeah. Exactly. And the thing about that for me is that they you would say to them, okay, you want this form of government. You want to install the social reign of Christ the King. Well, let's look at the past. Let's look at, them acting in a way that's exactly parallel to these communist governments you hate, executing political dissidents, torturing political dissidents, banning books, controlling information, controlling the.
Lost you a little bit, Anthony. I'll hang on. I'll talk about my second point while we're waiting for Anthony to come back. The other point I wanted to make is that Orwell was a socialist. Oh, you're back. What's up? Oh.
Okay, I'm back. So anyway, where was I when you?
You were talking about like the social king.
All good now. All good.
I can hear you. That's the important part. You were talking about the social reign of Christ the King.
It's so frustrating. It's happened. It's like the third time.
Yeah. Is your connection?
I see. I don't see you anymore, but I hear you. Is that on
works.
purpose?
Yeah, you're fine. It's fine.
Okay. It seems. Alrighty. So here's 1, 2, 3 testing. We're all good.
Cool.
Okay. I'm just making sure. I don't want to get on a roll again and then have it cut off again and then I get screwed up again. So anyway, what I was saying there was, before the internet connection so rudely interrupted us, was I was saying that you present these two things to them and you say, okay, it seems to me that these governments you hate are acting a lot like the government you seem to want, and their response would be, oh, but it's bad when humans are doing it, so they're doing it for the wrong reasons. It's bad because they don't have, their government isn't infused with a Christian worldview. It's just,
oh boy.
So that's the this keeps happening.
You're cutting in and out.
My connection's been fine so far.
I've got.
Okay.
My connection.
All right. Let me. I'm just getting rid of all my tabs here. Give me a second.
Sure. While you're getting rid of your tabs, I'll say that
Apologies.
No, you're good. You're good. A lot of people don't know this about George Orwell, but he was a democratic socialist. Like, he was proto Bernie Sanders. Like the man was not exactly like writing about, he didn't have Joe Biden in mind when he was writing 1984. Like and I feel like that's lost on like a lot of modern conservative fans of 1984. You know what I mean? But whatever.
Yeah. Any better? Any better?
Yeah. And hey, if you want, we can give we can give your internet a break a little bit, and we could go on to the second topic, which is something that I wrote about. So I'm happy to kind of go to topic number 2 and give your internet a chance to take a break if you want. Yeah. Cool. Okay.
Please take over.
Cool. So the second topic.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to refresh.
Okay, that sounds good. The second topic that we had for today is biblical roots. And this is going to be weird. I don't think a whole lot of people talk about Catholics are practicing doublespeak when they talk about biblical roots. Okay, bear with me. This is a little nerdy, but I think we're going to get there. So this is something that I've noticed a lot more recently. Catholics will talk about the biblical roots of things like Ash Wednesday. And so you might think that they're talking about Ash Wednesday can be found in the Bible. Ash Wednesday itself has real biblical roots, but that's not what they mean. When trad Catholics say that Ash Wednesday has real biblical roots, all they mean is that the practice of dressing in sackcloth, fasting, and general references to ashes can be found in the Bible. That's all that they mean. I'm going to go ahead and put you back on the screen, Anthony. Oop.
Okay.
There we go.
How we
Looking good, looking good. I'm just talking about how
the joys of life.
yeah, we're all right. We got there. References to ashes, sure, can be found in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Job tells Yahweh that he will, quote, repent in sackcloth and ashes in Job 42, chapter 6, or verse 6. Jesus makes reference to ashes in Matthew 11:21, referring to towns that refused to repent of sin, although they had witnessed miracles and had heard the gospel. Our Lord said, quote, if the miracles worked in you had taken place in Tyre and Sidon, they would have reformed in sackcloth and ashes long ago. I don't know about you, Anthony, but I find this to be kind of misleading to say that Ash Wednesday has biblical roots, when really all that the trads mean is ashes and sackcloth are found in the Bible. That's a bit of a reach. I think it's kind of doublespeak, because they're trying to sell you on this grand vision that Ash Wednesday has biblical roots, when that's just not really the case. It's not the case. Sure, people in the Old Testament times would put ashes on their body, like Catholics put ashes in the shape of a cross on their forehead. That's not biblical. And what's funny is that Catholics will point to scripture like Esther 4:3. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and in ashes. What does it mean to lay in ashes? Well, it just means that they would literally roll around in dirt, in ashes, as a sign of penance. They would wear coarse clothes and roll around in ashes to look real dirty. So they look dirty, they feel dirty, they've got itchy, poor people clothes on. They're doing penance. But they would do this during times of war, times of famine, times when they felt like God had abandoned them and they needed to repent. They weren't doing this on the same day or even in the same season every single year, like the way that Lent is. Lent, the traditional 40-day preparation period, Lent, is really at the oldest from the 8th century AD. So the ritual for the Day of Ashes is found in the very earliest editions of the Gregorian Sacramentary, which dates to the 8th century. And that's just the Day of Ashes. It doesn't appear to be connected to Lent per se. About the year 1000, an Anglo-Saxon priest named Aelfric preached, "We read in the books, both in the Old Law and in the New, that men who repented of their sins bestrewed themselves with ashes and clothed their bodies with sackcloth. Now let us do this thing at the beginning of our Lent, that we strew ashes upon our heads to signify that we ought to repent of our sins during the Lenten fast." That's the first time that we hear about Lent, in 1000 AD. 1000 AD, not 100, 1000. So while I do not disagree that ashes and sackcloth have been a sign of penance since the Old Testament, I simply don't think it's correct to say that Ash Wednesday has biblical roots. The idea of a day that we get ashes on our head every single year, regardless of what else was going on to kick off a season of penance, seems to be a post-biblical idea by at least 700 years. So to say that it has biblical roots, in my opinion, is doublespeak.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's very good, analysis there, and you're always. I think we make a good team, because you're way better at the academic, finding quotes and putting things together. And I don't know what I bring to it, but I'm very grateful for your rigorous, academic look into these things. I guess I approach this more from maybe an emotional standpoint, or of a standpoint of just because at the end of the day, faith is about emotional needs, not just pure, not just emotional whims, but emotional needs. We all have them. We all have um, emotional states we have to achieve at some point in our lives with some regularity in order to have a good life, have an objectively healthy, good, happy life. And so um, when and I'm so glad, going back to your, I don't want to get too off of your point about the ashes and everything, because I think that's all absolutely valid, and it absolutely goes to, it speaks to further issues here, because the Catholic Church's whole claim to authority, what this all rests on, is that they're the closest, like, the people who founded the church were literally Jesus's apostles, right? Peter, they physically touched him, they were physically with him, so that's their claim. Because other churches, right, like Mormonism, Joseph Smith was this guy thousands of years later in the 1800s in America who claims that God spoke to him, and it's like, well, you know, we just kind of have to take his word for it. But for Catholics, the argument is no, we don't have to take their word for it, because they were literally there with Jesus. But all four Gospels were written by people. All four of them. It was like 80 years, right, after Jesus died when they were written. There's sort of, I think even among some Catholics, there's just the sort of assumption that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all the actual apostles in, like, that's such a common belief, right? That the gospel writers were actual disciples of Jesus, and they were not. And so there's a dishonesty there, in that there's quite a substantial gap between the actual laws and dogmas and structure of the church and the actual life of Jesus. There's a significant length of time. So that argument about the Catholic Church is the founders of it were literally right there with Jesus. That's just not the case. Because Peter, again, I think there's a strong case to be made that the church he was running was not what the Catholic Church ended up becoming, and that Paul really shaped the modern Christian church afterwards. He just sort of took the whole operation over and hijacked it. But yeah, no, exactly. That's such an important point to make, Kevin, because a key argument about the authority of the church is based on a false idea.
Yeah, I just get bothered when, like, clearly medieval ideas are presented as biblical. It's like, well, no, like, come on, let's. And
Yeah.
I can't help but feel like some of that is like a hangover of Dale. Don't misinterpret me. So Dale's in the audience. Dale's my friend, Presbyterian. I think that this is a hangover from Protestantism, and what I mean by that is this is not a knock on Protestantism at all. I think that there are a decent number of Catholics who are jealous of their Protestant cousins, in as much as Protestants pretty much get to say everything that they hold is biblically based, because they just get rid of everything if it's not in the Bible, right? Like that was kind of the whole point of the Reformation. And I think that Catholics look at that and they're like, "Oh, sweet, we should do that too." But they can't, because they've got all these things like Lent and Ash Wednesday that are clearly,
Mm-hmm.
inventions of at the earliest,
Yeah.
like the 7th century or whatever. And
Yeah.
so now we have to make up these biblical roots, because I think it's a jealousy thing, frankly.
Well, exactly, and that whole thing about getting rid of everything that's just the Bible, and how can we trust the authority of this church who've added so many different things that don't come from the Bible that came later. You know, the the Catholic Church, there is a point to be made, and this is a point the Catholic Church makes, that if you can take the Bible and you can get, if you just take the Bible as is, you're going to go off in a million different directions, trying to establish some sort of culture, right, or some sort of church that's based solely on the Bible. Uh, because we have, right, you have seen communities that are based apparently solely on the Bible that create wonderful, healthy. Yes, well said, Kevin. As well, I agree. Is also
Thank you.
that create wonderfully healthy communities and churches, and their faith, their doctrine. It's all just from the Bible. It's just their pastor's interpretation of the Bible. You can get that, but you can get like Waco and David Koresh as well, where he's like, I understand the Bible completely, and that this is that all happened just kind of an hour away from me, in Waco. The with the whole compound, everything, it ended in mayhem and death. He found in the Bible a justification for this whole, and of course, back in the South, before the Civil War, the slavery was justified very often with quotes from the Bible. And so the Bible is not a book, it's a library. And if you treat it like, the problem is when you treat it like one book, one coherent whole, it's not a coherent whole. It's got a lot of it's got a lot of good things in terms of wisdom that could be valuable, but it's also got a lot of craziness and a lot of things that you shouldn't take literally if you're going to get anything valuable from it. And Genesis is a perfect example of that. Now, another issue here that that drove me away from, so the, the literal interpretation of Genesis, right? That was kind of the what sometimes I don't know if I should believe certain people who are trad Catholic creationists who claim that the church used its magisterial authority to declare things like denying the denying the heliocentric model, denying the certain scientific principles that are now just established fact today. One thing that actually really, really shook my face was when I listened to some trad Cath commentators saying we have to be geocentrist because this Pope said it definitively that we had to be. And we have to reject evolution, or we have to reject the Big Bang because this Pope in 15 whatever said we had to be. And I looked at that and I said, well, damn, it looks like from all their in their according to their definitions, that's correct. And I was like, well, I guess it's not true then, because um it it can't be true. Like what we know, the geocentric model, it simply can't be true. And I'd say the same thing about evolution has to be true. The Big Bang has to be true. We're just past the point now where there can be any legitimate doubt, because so many other things have been uncovered that since these theories were propounded, that it's like you make a prediction and it said, well, if this is true, then that should be true, and that prediction has just been proven constantly over and over again. So somebody mentioned earlier she hopes we talk about the definition of love and the trad Caths, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, because you might think I'm going off the rails a bit, but that actually ties back perfectly to that whole issue of love. Because the thing that ended the emotional connection for me, that's so important, because when you have religious faith, it's like you have this invisible family member. And of course, in your mind, that invisible family member is God, but the manifestation of that invisible family member, this invisible God, is the church, is the community you're with, right? So, um, I think you love and the definition of it. I just got to the point where the the way love was presented to me, as in terms of how this God loved me, supposedly loved me, and how he was presented to me, I just couldn't make sense of this definition of love anymore. And I think the lightning bolt struck me when I watched George Carlin, and he had this routine about the God who will send you to a place where you will. He has a list of 10 things he does not want you to do, and if you do any of those things, he'll send you to a place where you burn and scream. And when he's performing it, he does it like this, where you will burn and scream and cry and suffer for all eternity. But he loves you. and you should watch that footage to see how it does. And that something just clicked in my head when I saw that, because I it had been in the back of my mind the whole time. All these things that were just not manifestations of love, which were manifestations of cruelty. And the answer was always, whenever I posed this question, the answer always came back to bringing it back to me for having a lack of faith or thinking blasphemous thoughts, or or having it turned it into a moral criticism of me for saying love is supposed to be this, right? But God does this. Like when you love someone, you're supposed to protect them. But I can see all these people throughout history and in my own life who supposedly loved God, but they were not protected. And it's like, well, yeah, He's protecting you, just not in the way you realize. And that's always their answer to the problem of evil, right? God may have sufficient reason for allowing bad things to happen, and they'll always acknowledge that's not emotionally satisfying. Okay, well, but if it's not emotionally satisfying, then all I have is um if it does, then all I have is just falling back on the authority you're presenting it to me. And the authority is based on the idea that this is all based on love. This isn't cruelty, this is love. It's like a parent treating you in a way you might not like in the moment, but it's for your own good. But even you can't explain to me how, like, there's no explanation of how they, they tell you on the one hand that there's no salvation outside the church, and everyone can know the natural law in their heart, and everyone deserves hell because they're all secretly asking for it, and they all just wanted to sin. But when you're when you're reacting in a natural human way to cruelty or to hardship or to something that's being asked of you that is either doesn't make sense or is like physically impossible, the answer is always, well, you're not loving God enough, you're not trusting enough, and they bring it back on you. And that's the definition of an abusive relationship. If you saw that in any relationship between two human beings, constantly saying like, why are you doing this to me, why are you doing that to me, you don't love me, how dare you ask that, and deriding them and shaming them for asking these questions and for feeling like they're not being loved, you would see that as inherently abusive in any human relationship. And so that's the contradiction again. You see it in one way in the world, but yet when God does it, it's completely different rules apply. Well, if different rules apply, then I can't emotionally connect to it. I go on a bit too long sometimes, but I just try to drive through my point, drive it home, so I don't get off the rails. Crash the train before it gets off the track. Sorry.
I brought up pick and choose comment here. I can't trust the Bible either, but I can trust an all-loving God who I hope exists, who may or may not exist, but I cling to that hope with no juice left to buy any God claims incompatible with that hope. And my comment here is that I'm super sympathetic to this. I don't even know what it's almost not even religion at that point, but so just on Monday I was having a conversation with a Catholic who calls himself a Catholic pragmatist. And so what he means by being a pragmatist is he believes this stuff and he fully admits that a lot of this belief is kind of outside of his control, first of all. But then second of all, there's a pragmatic element to it. And the pragmatic element will be being able to live life, maybe, having maybe not no panic attacks, right? But maybe you have half as many panic attacks as you otherwise would have, because you have this pragmatic belief, this pragmatic hope in an all good God. And I'm super cool with that. I really am. Like, I'm afraid sometimes of coming off as like Mr. Hyper Skeptic who hates all religious people, and that's certainly not me.
Yeah.
And I think that there's like a real place for this kind of pragmatic version of religion. Notably, though, this kind of pragmatic version of religion would really have no teeth to oppress people, right? So
Right.
and
Exactly.
and notably, my friend Matthew, who I was talking to on Monday, who the Catholic pragmatist, is explicitly of the opinion that like if you are a gay person and you wouldn't be safe in your local religious community, you should not be part of our religious community. You should be safe. You should go where you're going to be safe. So because he's a pragmatist, right? So the same rules that apply for him would apply to you, even if that means that he's going to wind up being Catholic and you're not. And I think that's something that
Right.
I can totally get behind. You know.
Exactly. Well, Catholic, I can totally get behind it too, and I would say that Catholic pragmatism is like the polar opposite of trad Catholicism, because the whole point of trad Catholicism is to have teeth, is to impose their will, is to get the social reign of Christ the King going. And when you have that pragmatic Catholic attitude, you're not going to engage in that. You're not going to, and so yeah, I think that that is the perfect attitude to have. The attitude of, I can't fully explain this, but it works for me. It makes me happy, and so that's as far as it's going to go. And I can live my life in a way where I hopefully people will look at me and be like, I want what he's got, and that's how it should be. And they'll ask me about it, and I'll teach them. But the attitude generally of trad Catholics, especially the leadership, and again, you kind of have to emphasize that you're not necessarily talking about the families when you're talking about trad Catholics. You're talking about the leadership, the priests, and the media figures there or the thought leaders who control where the dialogue goes. Their attitude is, God wants us to impose this on the world. We have a mission from God to shape the world in our image. And so, but at the same time, but so okay, if you're going to do that, you need um, proof beyond a reasonable doubt that your ideas are legitimate. And even if they are legitimate, you have no right to impose them by force. Find an accepted community outside the church. Yeah, exactly. 100%. I agree with that one, Quasines. And yeah, I was just saying that. So trad cats have this kind of both ways thing, where on the one hand, when you get down to it, they will absolutely admit that there are aspects of Catholicism, of the faith, that they can't fully wrap their heads around, that they can't fully rationally explain or even rationally defend. And the Eucharist is a perfect example of that, because so often they will openly talk about the Eucharist and saying it doesn't make sense, or it works against the senses. The senses are not agreeing with this proposition. But the whole point of the proposition of the Eucharist is you humble yourself for out of love, right? That again, and that's the thing. And again, I can't think of any legitimate loving relationship where the one person's constantly testing the other person's love and constantly thinking, how can I throw as much hardship at this person as possible, so they'll withstand it and to me and love me, even though I'm making it as hard as I can. And that's exactly because our life's supposed to be a passion, right? Because we're supposed to suffer endlessly throughout our life according to the traditional Catholic prescription. uh, it's just an incomprehensible uh, definition of love, that a loving person would be like, oh, you love me, what about this? You love me, what about that? Can you handle that? Can you handle this? And that's the framework, really. That's the setup. And uh yeah, I mean, again, it's just more of this. uh, so the other point I was trying to make was, you don't get to impose your views if you're also admitting that you can't fully explain your views. You're just trusting a non-authority. That's when it goes, okay, well, I'm not accepting your force based on your trust of something. I have to trust it too if I'm going to go along with you. And again, I've talked about in the trad culture how there's sort of an excusing of violence to some degree, or and they're constantly talking about the saints who engaged in battle and warfare and making that all romantic and everything. But anyway, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you were ready to move on to the next doublespeak example. Um, I've got,
Absolutely.
unless you had one in mind, I can go with the next one.
No, go ahead.
Cool. So this example of doublespeak is Catholics will say tradition is the most important source of authority. You'll hear this often in debates about sola scriptura. A Protestant might say that the most important authority is Scripture. And a Catholic might say something like, well, how do you think you got your Scripture? You got your Scripture through the authority of tradition, of the church, of the tradition of the fathers kind of, forming the canon. So it's actually tradition that is the most important authority. I don't think that Catholics actually mean that when they say it, though. And let me tell you why. I'm going to use an example, but I really could have used a few different examples. So I'm gonna go into detail in one, and then I'm going to list a few others that I think could also serve as examples. The example that I've chosen to illustrate my point is cremation. In 1300, the year 1300, Pope Bonaventure VIII stated that anybody who boils a body is ipso facto excommunicated. Boiling a body, that's not the same thing as cremation. Let me explain. This is like a little this is a little weird. So imagine a rich person died in a faraway land in the year 1300. That rich person has like a family tomb, like a family sepulcher back home, and they would like their bones to be buried there. But they died 1,000 kilometers away. It's going to take a month or 2 months or something like that to get from the foreign land back home. Whoever they were with, body's going to rot. Whoever they're with is going to drag a rotting body with them over 1,000 kilometers? Probably not. So instead, here's a good idea. Let's boil the body. It's gross, but everything will fall off the bones. Great. You can scoop up the bones, and you can put the bones in a little bag, and you can carry the bag back, and you just got the bones. Like it's like that's so much better. Now you're not lugging a rotting body that is going to be decomposed by the time that you get back anyway. It's just very pragmatic, right? And now your bones get to be buried back home. That sounds clever and it sounds fine, right? Wrong. Excommunicated. You cannot do that. And that's been so. By the way, Charlemagne actually made cremation illegal in like the 7th century or the 8th century or whatever Charlemagne was living. But granted,
and quick question. That whole thing about cremation, it's because like we're supposed to be like reunited with our bodies after death. So if you cremate the body, that'll screw that up. Which something that's the reason for it, right?
That's what the church said in 1963, and I don't buy it. And let me tell you why. Okay. So we have Pope Bonaventure in the 14th century, the early 14th century, just issuing this plain old you can't boil your bodies, and he also says you can't spill the guts of your of dead bodies. I don't know exactly what that means. I don't really know, but you can't boil them and you can't spill their guts. Okay, fine. But here's the thing. Cremation was made illegal by a Catholic monarch hundreds of years prior, and now we have a pope excommunicating people who were doing this thing, right? Okay. Well, it keeps going. Let's fast forward a couple hundred years to the 19th century. In 1886, the Sacred Congregation of the Holy Office, which became the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, issued a statement that said, hey, everybody, if you belong to an organization that promotes cremation, you're excommunicated. And 7 months later, Pope Leo XIII ratified that. It is widely viewed as something being infallible if the DDF and the Pope agree on it, because that's all of the bishops pretty much. So if that's the case, then it really seems like cremation is... So it's an excommunicable offense that used to be illegal in Catholic countries, and the DDF, signed by the Pope, issued a statement saying that you can't do it. Okay. And in the 1917 Code of Canon Law, and I know canon law is just canon law. It's not dogma. I get it. But in 1917, the Code of Canon Law simply says, if a person has in any way ordered his body to be cremated, it is illicit It is illicit to obey such instructions, and if such a provision occur in a contract, testament, or document, it is to be disregarded. So not only can you not get yourself cremated, but if your father dies and says, son, my dying wish is for you to cremate me, you cannot do that.
Mhm.
You cannot. Okay. And
Yeah.
again, that's just
Yeah.
canon law. So I think that my first examples of the ordinary and the extraordinary magisterium excommunicating people over this, I think, is significantly stronger. In 1963, this is like during Vatican II, let me pull up the name of the document. I'm so sorry. The document was called Piam et Constantem. And in it, it says, hey, everybody. So it turns out that this whole time, what cremation really was and I want to read the words directly to you, a symbol of antagonistic denial of Christian dogma, above all, the resurrection of the dead and the immortality of the soul. That's exactly what you were talking about, Anthony. So in 1963, the church is saying, hey, you can't, like, cremation was only ever done in the past as doing this to the Catholic Church.
Right.
But people don't mean that anymore, and so now it's fine. Here's the
And
thing.
you established it wasn't always the case because sometimes it was out of necessity. You had to carry a body across a long distance.
Yeah, and I will say that the church historically has been okay with cremation during times of war, like if it's just there's way too many dead soldiers to bury, or in times of pandemic,
Like the
that would
plague?
also be okay. Yeah, the plague would be okay. But that's a lot like their view on abortion. Abortion is okay if it's to save the life of a mother, right? But otherwise it's not. That's the same view that they had about cremation. Cremation is okay if people are literally going to die if you don't cremate people. But otherwise it's not okay. It's not okay. And here's the thing. We were excommunicating Catholics who were traveling from one Catholic nation to like another Catholic nation. Like somebody who died in France but needs to be buried in Italy, like is getting is getting excommunicated if they cremate their body or if they boil their body. And so I think, good question. Is it discipline or dogma? I'm explicitly talking about discipline, not dogma, and this matters.
Yeah.
This matters. So my argument is that Catholics will say that tradition matters. Oh, and so my point with the 1963 document is that it reversed everything. So we have unbroken, clear tradition from 1300 until at least 1917 with the Code of Canon Law. And then in 1963, we have a complete reversal of that. Why? Because tradition isn't what matters. Dogma is what matters. Catholics will say that tradition is the ultimate source of authority, not scripture. But I think what Catholics really mean is dogma is the ultimate source of authority, not tradition and not scripture. And why do I say that? Because the clear, unbroken tradition regarding cremation is something that was done away with. Dogma is the only thing, is like the only exception to that rule. So other examples that I could have gone with besides cremation are things like the death penalty. Again, was never a dogma, but it was part of tradition, and it got done away with. Another thing is like charging interest on debt, slavery. All of these things are part of tradition, but they were never dogmatized. And so I don't think when Catholics say that tradition is what matters, I think what really matters to Catholics is not tradition, but dogma.
Well, yeah, I think what really matters, and again, what matters to tradition, I think you made the traditional Catholic distinction there. I noticed, by the way, real quick, that there's the date on is 1917 Code of Canon Law. That's 1917, and there's almost a contradiction there in those two quotes you gave. Pretty much the 1917 code and you mentioned earlier the Code of Canon Law is not dogmatic and the previous one is, and that's the distinction made. Okay, fine, but
no, not
here's
dogmatic.
the issue
Sorry,
here.
neither of them were dogmatic, but one of them was supposed to be infallible.
Well, isn't that like apples and oranges, kind of well, dogmatic and infallible, aren't they sort of interchangeable in terms
You
of
would think.
like if something's dogmatic, it's infallible?
You would think. So a lot of Catholics will tell you that things are infallible. So like a lot of Catholics are of the opinion that canonizations, at least canonizations post
Hmm.
1170, are infallible. A lot of Catholics will tell you that.
Yeah.
Not all theologians will tell you that, but like half of Catholic theologians probably will tell you that canonizations are infallible. None of them are
I,
dogmatized.
I, lo- I love this because we're proving our point right now, right? Because I was like, wait, dogma and infallibility, and you're like, no, it's a little distinction there. And so it's like you split hairs down to the atom when you're talking to these people, right? Because you're like, well, this means that, and they're like, no, no, no. It doesn't mean this in this context. It means this in that context. And when you're having these kind of debates, is like, okay, but is this dogma or not? Is this infallible or not? You spend these hours long conversations where they're thumbing through all this text and being like, this canon law says this and this definition says that, and even if they seem to contradict each other, well, you need to look at which one is dogmatic, which statement has the most authority, right? Which one was said with the when he's looking toward the east, standing on one foot, holding his head, like all the right things have to be in place, right? All the right legal frameworks, and that really goes against the idea of, you know, the faith being this all being simple, right? That this is something for everybody, that this is something anyone can grasp. It seems as though you have to have book stacks and stacks of all these dictionaries and encyclopedias of terms in order to fully grasp to any degree of satisfaction the condition the church's teachings, right? Because they whenever you come up with an issue, they just bury you in definitions and terms and stuff, and that's a way to sort of overwhelm you, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. So Emily sent in a comment, and it's totally fine that it took you a while to pull up specific sources. Though the English word dates from when Kevin said the season of Lent dates to the 300s. So I'd be interested to read more about this because associated fasts are
Mhm.
mentioned in canons 45, 49, 50, 51, and 52 of the councils of Laodicea, and also seems to be mentioned at Nicaea. Hey, so I would love to read more about this. What I will tell you is that, as far as I'm aware, the first mention of Ash Wednesday isn't until the 7th century, and Laodicea was
Mhm.
what, the 4th century or whatever. Um, so
Mhm.
I'm skeptical that we'd be referring to the same thing. Um, wouldn't be shocked if there was a season of penance. But as far as I can tell, Lent is an invention that is significantly later than Laodicea. Um, but I
Okay.
am totally, if you want to send me some like resources about that, I would love to read more about that. I did find it on New Advent, and um, let me see if I can kind of just put it on the screen real quick, like over here.
Mhm.
So there's this whole big, they write the word Lent in there, and then there's this whole big thing in the red. So so Canon 45 is listed right here, and it says second week in Lent. As far as I'm aware, the first time that the word Lent was used was actually around the year 1000. And then they have this big red text here, and I haven't read that yet, but let me see.
Mhm. I'll just defer to
Let's
you
see.
on all this.
Yeah, no. Hey, if I'm wrong, I want to know. Let me read the other ones.
Yeah.
Emily said canons 45, 49. Let me go down to 49. During Lent again. Yeah, I want to see the Latin. I wonder what word they used in Latin. Um, let's see. Canon 50 is also Lent. Yeah. See, like here it says Maundy Thursday, but that's in brackets, so it's like they're not saying Maundy Thursday, but that's what we would call it today. Yeah. If I'm wrong, I want to know. Um, I'm not sure that this would change my argument entirely. If something was invented in the 4th century instead of the 7th century, and I shouldn't say invented, but if something originated in the 4th century instead of the 7th century, it's still 300 years instead of 600
Still
years.
100 years, yeah.
Right.
1 century is 100 years, and I would say 100 years between Jesus and the people who are speaking for him. 100 years alone is a significant enough amount of time to doubt it.
Yeah. But if I'm wrong, I still want to know, just for the sake of like, I just honestly, it's I like being right. And so when I'm wrong, I want to be told when I'm wrong so that I can stop being wrong and then I can start being right. Because I really like being right. So I love being corrected. So and I'm not even kidding. Like, I seriously do love when I'm wrong, but then I become right. And when other people help me become more right, that makes me excited. So
I like being right when the stakes are high. Like, if the stakes are high, then I like being right. If they're not so high, then I can be wrong, and it's fine.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay. I had one more like double speak example. Did you have one that you wanted to do, Anthony, or do you want me to run into like my last one?
You can go with your last one. I think I've covered the essential points I wanted to get across there, and there's more we could cover later. But yeah, go ahead and do your point.
Cool. One last point, just so Daniel says, I don't understand why there is a problem of a tradition starting later in time. For the record, there isn't. There isn't a problem with a tradition starting later in time. It's just that a lot of the Catholic apologist types would like to say that something has biblical roots, when I don't think that it does. I think that it has roots in the 4th century, which is fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not biblical. You know what I mean? Like that. So that's it.
Right. If I could answer this real quick, why I think it is a problem is because the whole, like I said earlier, the whole claim of authority that the Catholic Church has rests on essentially Jesus founding the church, right? But putting his hands on saying to Peter, "Upon this rock I will build my church," right? So, the question is, why can we trust you? Why do you speak for God? Why is your authority legitimate? Yeah, exactly. Theological roots. And when there's a split of time between the beginning of the tradition and the source of the supposed source of the tradition, I think you could understand that raises some questions, right? Because if the whole basis of the claim is that the authority rests on the proximity in time to the leader, right? The leader starting it, and then you look at the history and see, wait, there's a gap of time that just fundamentally goes against the claim that the authority rests on it, and it's like a house of cards. The whole house of cards just falls down when you take that authority, that claim of authority that it rests on.
Yeah, and so truthfully, I'm not even like I'm not bothered per se by like late traditions. I just think that people should be aware that these are late traditions, and that like, hey, look, if I started a tradition today and I passed it down for 100 years and that tradition was about 2,000 years ago, like, probably not super accurate. And so there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with like having that belief. You should just be aware of it, and you should be like, yeah, so maybe it's not like, maybe it's not rooted in actual history, but I don't know. I tend to think that you can get just as much of like out of a religion while fully admitting that like a lot of it is like mytho history rather than like history. Like I don't.
Yeah,
that's just me though.
But admit that. Don't be like don't force it on others.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. My last doublespeak example was, you can ask questions, and we love questions. This one is going to be very different than my first two. So my first two, I tried to be a little bit more academic. This last one is going to be it's going to be a lot more personal. So
yeah,
I
like this one.
Okay, cool. I'll be interested to see if your experiences were similar to mine, but I heard you can ask questions time and time again growing up, but I don't think if anyone meant it, at least not exactly as it is. I think what they really meant is you can ask questions as long as you accept my answer. You must accept the officially sanctioned answer. That was the attitude. I find this kind of rich coming from an organization that banned books. The Index Librorum Prohibitorum, or the Index of Forbidden Books, was a ever-changing list of publications deemed heretical or contrary to the morality as defined by the Sacred Congregation of the Index, a Catholic, like actually part of the Catholic hierarchy, and it was their job to ban books. Catholics were forbidden to print them or read them. So like a Catholic bookshop is not supposed to print books on the Index. Definitely nobody read them. And your local bishop was supposed to be able to like add books to that list. So if there's like some small book that's only in your little country or whatever, like your bishop could add that to the list at your bishop's discretion. The Index was active from 1560 until 1966. Most people don't realize this. It was active until 1966. That is what, just after Vatican II or whatever? Which means that in trad culture, the Index of Forbidden Books is kind of a thing. Notable books that were historically on the Index, and the Index was ever changing, but Johannes Kepler's his Astronomicae Copernicae, published between 1618 to 1621, was on there. Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason from 1781 was on there. Certain works of Saint Robert Bellarmine were actually on the Index at some point, so they were it's like, and now he's a canonized saint. So it just shows you like how many books had been banned, and people of like the radder of the trads still think that banning books is sometimes a good idea. When I was growing up, I remember being probably 15 or so, and I had made like a Muslim friend for the first time. And because I was a good trad, I was telling my priest, like, hey, I think that I want to start reading books on Muslim apologetics so that I can refute Muslim apologetics. And he told me, don't read that. And I said, like, why? Like, I have the truth on my side, so like I should be able to read anything, and like what's there to be afraid of? Like I know I'm right.
Mm-hmm.
And his point was, well, yes, you are right, but you might be tricked by these books, and you might be convinced that those books are correct. So he told me not to read them. Now, it wasn't like you must not read them, but he was very much so like, well, you should talk to your parents, and I would tell your parents not to let you read those books. And, ultimately it's your parents' decision, but as your confessor, like, I will tell you that you probably shouldn't read those books. It won't be good for your... And I remember even when I was like 15 thinking like, really? Like, you don't want me to read this book? Like, why?
Yeah, I guess the truth will set you free, but you're not free to read anything you want.
Yeah. Does that sound like the freedom to ask questions to you? It doesn't to me. And I definitely think that it's doublespeak when trads in particular tell their kids that they are free to ask questions, but then they promote a banned book list and they do not let their children legitimately pursue the truth.
Yeah, well, you can ask questions up until a point. You can ask questions, but if the question starts to get maybe a little blasphemous, maybe the tone of your question, like let's say if you ask, this didn't really happen to me. I'm just thinking of an example. Because I definitely do remember instances where where a certain line of questioning, I don't know if got me in trouble is the right word, but it made things tense. Like I would go down a certain line of questioning, and it would start to get to the point where it was like I would start my moral intentions would start to be questioned by going down that road. But one example I can think of now is like, let's say in the Bible, Isaac and Jacob. You might ask the question, why did God lie to Abraham and Isaac? Sorry, Abraham and Isaac. God tells Abraham to kill your son, and he's about to, and then God stops it. And I've always thought that is just one of the most that's a great example of a story in the Bible, that in the Old Testament, that really just made me question all of this whole thing. You could ask the question, why did God lie to Abraham? And the response would be, how dare you? God didn't lie. He was test It was a test, and it's like, okay, God told Abraham, I want you to do this, right? I mean, in so many words, he said, I want you to sacrifice your son. And he did not actually want him to. So this is when we get into the double speak and definitions of stuff. What is that but a lie? Like, I know that he had the intention later on down the line of changing his mind, but again, he allowed Abraham for a time to believe that it was God's will for him to kill his son, and he allowed Isaac for a moment to believe that he was about to die. He made it all right in the end, right? But he still lied in that moment. And there's no way, I don't think, that you could talk to someone with this kind of mindset and get a satisfactory answer where they wouldn't accuse you of lying. And another great example of this is has to do with Mary. I remember growing up constantly bristling at whenever I heard, Catholics worship Mary. That was just drilled into us, right? We don't worship Mary. But let's think about this. What do we actually do with Mary? We pray to her, we venerate her, we have statues of her, we ask for her intercession. There's a belief that she can like, if God's going to do something that's bad for us, Mary literally has the ability to change God's mind. That's in Catholic theology, that Mary has the ability to prevent God, which also goes against goes against the idea of a God whose will is fixed, right? If Mary can change God's mind, which I'm not exaggerating that point, you know, that contradicts again the idea of God's will is fixed from all time. And but again, Catholics worship Mary. I mean, I'm gonna ruffle a lot of the feathers by saying that, but there's no other. I can't. I look at what I remember what I did in regards to Mary, and I can't think of it. I can't define it in any other way than worship. And the only reason I can really think of it that going back to it, and again, the people, the Catholics spend hours and hours and hours, trying debating this point, but it just comes down to word games. It just comes down to dictionary games in terms of why they don't worship Mary when the behavior is no different than the basic definition of it.
Yeah, and I mean, in your, like, so I almost said like in your defense. That's not what I mean. But like, to your point, I like a Catholic who's aware of the words Latria and Dulia will actually tell you, like, yeah, no, we do worship Mary. We worship all the saints, actually. But the way that they worship the saints is, and I'm going to mix it up. Which one is which? Latria and Dulia. One of them is only for God, and one of them is for like Mary and the saints and stuff like that. And they are
Hmm.
both, like, they could both be translated as the word. Let me Google it real quick. So Dulia is translated as veneration. So Dulia is what we give to the angels and saints, but Latria, I guess, is only for God. Um,
I'm
so
hearing this for the first time. I just wanted to let you know
ah,
I was raised trad Catholic you, and I'm hearing this concept for the first time. So yeah, there's so many concepts that they've come up with to explain these contradictions or to explain them. There's so many that you can spend a lifetime digging through them. And so, yeah, no, all what I remember personally is just constantly trying to resist the idea that we worship anyone but God. And yet, there's the cognitive dissonance of like
I,
yeah,
I forgot
exactly,
about
hyperdulia.
hyperdulia.
Yeah,
Yeah, I have to read more.
here we
I
go again.
forget.
I'm just gonna say, here we go again, proving how complicated this stuff is. When it's supposed to be simple. That's the idea. The idea is that the only reason Kevin, do you remember that feeling of like almost like frustration at the rest of the world? Is like why they can't get this, why they can't see what's right in front of their face, how obviously beautiful and true the Catholic Church is, and yet we're dissecting this and proving that it's this, you know, it's this labyrinth of terms and definitions that only work to confuse and make difficult. And so if it requires this much analysis and study of it, how accessible is it? How much can you really hold your neighbor to sad caricature of Catholic? Yeah, exactly. But the thing for that for me is that the things that makes it sad for me in some way is that I I've said this before. I do miss in a lot of ways the comfort, the stability, the anchoring effect that Catholicism or religion in general has on you. It settles you. It gives you a place, a safe place to land at the end of the day. In some ways, I don't feel like I have a safe place to land. I have my own ideas about the world and how it works and everything, but there's sort of the overwhelming feeling of being alone in that belief, and it's like of the loneliness that being separated from a religious faith brings you. But at the same time, I'd rather be lonely than to live a lie. And to say it in that terms is harsh, but I think that the religion serves such an essential purpose in anchoring people, and even if it is based on a lie, at the end of the day, as long as it's a benevolent lie, I don't really care. But this what so often happens is the lie becomes malicious, or and you hurt people to further the aims of this belief, and that's what this is all about, and what I'm doing here. And you've brought this issue up too, Kevin, where the more you get into this discussion, the more you feel like you're Mr. Hate Religion, Mr. Make fun. You're turning into Richard Dawkins or Bill Maher or something like that, and it's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to acknowledge the need for this thing. While at the same time, it's like you can bring it back to that basic principle you were taught of a kid of don't eat too much candy or don't eat too much sugar. It's like too much of a good thing is bad, and what you could maybe say is too much of a good thing is too much of this desire for certainty and stability, to the point where I'm so stable, I'm gonna spread that. I'm so certain, I've got so much certainty, I'm gonna spread it throughout the world now, and that's when the danger comes in.
Yeah, no, well said. Um, that was the
Sure, you're just
last.
saying that.
That was the last thing on my list of trad Catholic doublespeak. But I do have one question left, and that's a question for you, Anthony. Unless, did you have any other like doublespeaks that you wanted to address?
I think we got the point across. It's been like what, an hour and 25 minutes.
Yeah.
I think we covered our basics, and yeah, in the future, if we think this is an important thing to unpack more, we certainly can. Um, but and of course, you the viewer can dive into more examples of this and find more examples of this. But I think we've established our point. But what was the question you had for me?
So we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, but we have a couple of people here now who weren't here at the beginning. So tell me, I put, your name here isn't just Anthony. It's Anthony Dragons of Victory. What is Dragons of Victory, and what is that weird link that's in the description of this video?
Right. So for anyone joining us now who didn't hear me say this earlier, I'll be happy to say it again. The point of the show today was, one, to cover the topics that me and Kevin just covered, but also to introduce you guys to my new project. So the Dragons of Victory is my new YouTube channel, and I kind of want it to be more than just a channel. I want it to be this sort of be a moniker or a banner or a flag that you can fly under. And the theme of this flag is that it is exposing the toxic, destructive culture of traditional Catholicism. It's very specific. And so that means that non-traditional Catholics, mainstream Catholics, are more than welcome to join our ranks. We are a very, very open group. We are exclusive. We exclude one solitary demographic, and that's traditional Catholics. And honestly, Jehovah's Witnesses, Scientologists would not be welcome either. I think the broader issue here is it's trying to make the division clear, the line clear between healthy religion and destructive religion, um, healthy cults to destructive cults. Not that there's necessarily a healthy cult, but what Star Trek fans, Star Wars fans, they're cults in a way. The intent groups of people who have intense beliefs and intense experiences together. You could maybe call cults in some degree, but I think for the sake of definitions, it's better to use the term destructive cult. I'm going to try to do that going forward to differentiate this group. And so the Dragons of Victory, that came from dragons. Tradcaths sort of think dragons are real because they think St. George literally killed one. And I remember when I was sort of like deconverting, I remember talking to this girl who was not Catholic and who, like, I was telling her about, yeah, I'm Catholic, and she was like curious and asking me questions, and then she said, yeah, I dated this one boy from Cistercian once, and Cistercian was the monastery. The Cistercian monastery in Irving also had an all boys school there, and she knew one of the students there. And she said, yeah, I went on a date with this boy from Cistercian, and he told me he was Catholic. And I asked him, what's your favorite saint? And he said, St. George, because he killed a dragon. And she was like, but dragons aren't real. And she was just really, really perplexed by that. And they kind of think that, well, they're creationists. They think humans lived with dinosaurs, and so a lot of the times I heard this definitely. They'll say, well, when St. George fought the dragon, or when this person in this old text said they saw a dragon, it was really a dinosaur because the scientists are lying to us, and we really lived with dinosaurs. And so that's where that whole dragon thing came from, and the of victory thing that comes kind of from Our Lady of Victory, and this whole idea that the theme that they constantly repeat, where they say we've already won. The battle between God and the devil, it's already been won. We don't have to worry about if we're going to win or not. The only concern is we got to stay on the right team. So we'll go to so it's this image. It's an idea that produces a lot of arrogance and cockiness, right? Is the idea that, well, I've already won. I've won already. I remember one time, um, a long time ago, I was playing a racing game with a friend, and he was kicking my ass. It was like a video game. It was a racing video game, and he got his car right up to the finish line, and he just sort of stopped and hung out there for a second at the finish line. Like, he's like, I'm so far ahead of you, I can just sort of chill out here. And he just didn't move his car ahead at all. And I beat him. I just kept on going and going, and he was just like hanging out at the finish line, like, "Yep, I'm just gonna chill here for a while. Doop de doo. I'm gonna beat you." And then I just zoomed past him, and he was literally like, "What?" And so I'll always remember that moment because I remember how sure I was that I was gonna lose, and how confident he was that he won, and then I beat him. And so the only reason I mention that story is I put in the of victory part to sort of reclaim the idea, like, to sort of get them off their high horse a bit, and their whole theme of we've already won, we're already victorious. This whole that whole arrogant attitude is what I'm fighting against as well, because my philosophy, the way I'm approaching life now, is to never expect anyone else to to never hold anyone to something unless it's something I can prove with the same rigor as the scientific method.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an empiricist, so I'm not going to argue with there. I'm not arguing with you about using the scientific method to come up with our beliefs. I think that was an awesome description of Dragons of Victory. The
Thank you.
link to your channel is in the description down
Yes.
below. So I will
And
go
if I
ahead.
could say one more thing, sorry, I forgot to make this point too. In terms of the actual content of the channel, please don't expect regular updates. This is kind of a side project. It's an important side project, but I'm going to update it with if you subscribe, which I hope you do. I don't want you to be disappointed if you're not getting constant updates because I've got a lot of other projects and pursuits of mine that are more personally satisfying. There's a lot of things about this whole Dragons of Victory thing that are not personally satisfying. That honestly kind of bum me out and piss me off. But I still think it's super important to do, and so I'm going to keep doing it. But I'm going to pace myself, basically. So just to getting that out there.
And for the record, I fervently think that pacing yourself is a really good idea. I have
Hmm.
actually, it's possible that nobody's noticed, but I've spent considerably less time on YouTube over the past like month, and I feel so much better.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
uh, and you know what it's letting me do too? It's letting me take my time on my videos and kind of like make them a little bit more well thought out. And like I'm no longer putting out videos just to put them out. Like I like to think that I never did that, but even now especially, I'm kind of feeling like, yeah, you know what? If I need to take a month off and just think about videos, like I'd rather do that and like read, and actually just like read some books. I'm in the middle of
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of a book about the philosophy of the UFO right now by Dr. Jim
Oh,
Madden.
nice.
Dr. Jim Madden wrote the book on
Nice.
Thomistic philosophy of mind. He's a Catholic PhD philosopher,
Hmm.
and he wrote a book about the UFO. And there's a line in here. Here, I'll tease everybody because I'm certain that this will turn into a video eventually. But on page 7, you can see the highlighted part. If anybody thinks that I'm lying, they can go ahead and pause the screen, but I'm going to have to read it at some point. So there it is. Now I'm going to read it out loud. As someone trained in the philosophy of religion, I was struck in particular by the fact that the evidence for the reality of the UFO, whatever it is at least as good as the evidence supporting the founding miracles of the major religious traditions. Whatever you think about these particular claims, I don't believe that they completely lack evidential support, as in the traditional miracle claims have enough going for themselves evidentially that they cannot be ruled out. So what he's saying is he thinks that UFO phenomena have at least as good evidence for them as the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Interesting, coming from a Thomistic philosopher of
Yeah.
mind. So,
I definitely heard. So from my memories, whenever I would pose the question of aliens or UFOs to the trad priests or in my orbit, the only explanation they would really give me, well, it was like, well, if it is real, it's demons, and it was just casually thrown out there, like, oh, it's definitely demons if it's real. I don't know if you got any of that.
yeah, I did. I did. Yeah, everything that we like, all
Yeah.
magic that we don't like is demons. That is
Yep.
actually addressed. So I'm only halfway done with this book, but I've been listening to a bunch of podcasts that Dr. Madden has appeared on after this book, and he addresses that point specifically. I'm thinking about like
Yeah.
my script is not anything more than just a very rough draft right now because I actually need to
Yeah.
finish the book. But I plan
Yeah.
on doing like a whole write up about the UFO and what the UFO might mean for religious people. Um, so
Well, yeah, that's a good point because if it's not demons, like I see why they said that because demons is really the only explanation of that phenomena that doesn't completely contradict Catholic theology. Because if God also, so if there's another planet with other intelligent life on it, then we're not special, right? Earth isn't special. We're not special, and that's the whole reason that's the whole reason for their cosmological model, right? Is that the Earth has to be at the center of the universe because the Earth is the most important thing that God made.
yes, that's actually not the argument in the book. So the argument in the book
Okay.
so far is actually that it seems far more likely that UFOs would not be alien, but rather they would be like Tur aliens, as in like whatever they are part of Earth. And the question is something like this:
Hmm.
how aware of humans do you think the ants are? Do you think that ants have any awareness of human
I think
beings?
we interact with them to some degree. We knock over their
We
homes.
sure do.
They come to our picnics. You know.
But how aware of us do you think that they are?
Well, I think they're aware of that we're there, but I don't think they have an understanding of what we are. They're just aware
Exactly.
that
That's my
there's
point.
some force out there. Yeah, there's some force out there affecting us. They don't have any comprehension of what that force is. So you're saying that that's the same thing with aliens and us, basically?
Well, the whole point is that not aliens, right? Like the whole point is
Oh,
like,
okay.
what if there was another life form on Earth that was to us as we are to ants? We would have no conception of their existence other than the fact that every now and then they interact with us in some way and we kind of have no idea what's going on, but suddenly the ground is shaking and we're getting picked up off the ground or whatever, like,
Yeah,
so like the whole
interesting.
point, yeah,
Is
it's like,
this guy a trad?
no,
Quick
no,
question. Is this guy a trad?
he's
Okay,
not.
cool.
Yeah, he's super cool. I've had Dr. Madden on the show a couple times, um, and
Oh,
and I hope to have him on the show again to talk about this book because it's really cool. So,
I'll tune in.
humans are ant hurricanes. Yeah, we are sometimes.
Yes.
um, but yeah, so that's just a
Yeah.
teaser for what I've got going on in terms of. But my whole point there was don't burn yourself out. Take it slow. Read books. Think about stuff.
Yeah.
Don't worry about uh, putting out videos just
Yeah.
to put them
Well,
out.
well, I just want to make another point there. You'll notice if you watch any of the notable Tradcath YouTubers like Taylor Marshall, who, I mentioned this before, growing up at the Tradcath parish I went to, his beautiful face was a regular sight for me. I would see him all the time at Modern Day. And of course, I said that. That thing about his face in jest because I don't know. I just think he's such a vile, disgusting person, and it's really gross to me that I was in such close proximity of him for a long time and without a full awareness of who he really was. But anyway, the the point point I was trying to make there is that. Remind me, sorry, Kevin. What did you say? My train of thought just went off the rails there. What did you say beforehand? Just before I started talking.
I was just saying, don't burn yourself out. Read books. Like,
Yes,
yeah,
yes, exactly. So the point I was going to make about burning yourself out was people like Taylor Marshall, people like Kennedy Hall, Anthony Stein, these tradcath YouTubers. They produce almost daily content. And you can see in their attitude and their countenance just this overall just sort of anger and this sort of they're just always pissed off, right? That's the thing about tradcats. They're always pissed off because they're always absorbing and talking about things that piss them off and grind their gears, and their whole all the work they do is constantly showing you they're constantly showing you something that pisses them off and telling you why you should be pissed off too. That can't help but have an effect on your psyche, and you can see it in them. You can see just what angry people they are, and that's exactly why I am having a different approach with this content. I'm not producing it all the time. I'm not producing things just to produce things. I'm taking the time to think about, is this important to the overall mission of this? And I'm not holding myself to any sort of schedule or timeline. Because I've got other things to do, and I think that, you need to focus the majority of your energy on personal fulfillment, personal enrichment. That may sound narcissistic at first glance, and that runs totally counter to the ethos of traditional Catholicism. But you can't give what you don't have. And if you're not a mentally healthy person, if you're not a person who has given yourself sufficient self-care, you're not going to be you're going to end up like, like I mentioned, Taylor Marshall or Kennedy Hall or Anthony Stein, who are just all they can do is tell you how mad they are, and how upset they are. And I've talked about the trauma I went through and the pain I went through in my past, but I'm kind of in a way, I feel kind of done with that. I don't want to keep going on and on about how badly I was abused and what happened to me. I want my focus now to be on the larger issues and the flaws in the whole structure and the issues regarding trad Catholicism, and that's what Dragons of Victory is about. So I hope any of you out there, I hope you stay tuned in. And whenever I can get around to putting stuff up, I hope you enjoy it.
Awesome. Link to Dragons of Victory is in the description down below. Anthony, this was awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Rebecca, hello.
Thank you.
Everybody else, goodbye, good night. Thanks so much for hanging out. And until next time.